Good evening. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor to serve as director of the Roosevelt House. And on behalf of Jennifer Rabb, president of Hunter College, it's a delight to welcome you all and our partners at the Aspen Institute, and as always, Lori Tisch and the Tisch family and its many initiatives to promote dialogue. Here to the home where Franklin, Eleanor, and FDR's mother, Sarah, lived in side-by-side townhouses. From the outside, but with cutouts between the floors on the insides, a lifestyle that our boss likes to describe as the first New Deal. And while this house did not boast great works of art in its heyday, it did house Franklin and Eleanor, unparalleled patrons and supporters of the arts through very challenging times. The Roosevelts, as you may know, lived here at many times over 25 years, but for 4 consecutive historic months between Election Day 1932 and Inauguration Day 1933. And just a few floors above us, FDR literally formulated the policy outlines that became the New Deal social safety net, which, as I'm sure you know, embraced a novel idea: employment for artists during the Depression, a legacy of which both Roosevelts were immeasurably proud. I've been director here for only a year, so this is still a new house for me, but it's like Old Home Week when we can gather to talk about art and museums, a world where I spent 23 years and which Eleanor particularly loved. If you go through her My Day columns and Google art and art museums, you find countless references to visits to MoMA and the cloisters. Sadly, not the Met or the Whitney, but you know, it's not bad. It's a good start. And it's a particular thrill not only to welcome Lori for the second consecutive night, but to welcome my longtime colleagues and friends from the museum community who rank, just as they are billed tonight, great leaders. And that's Thelma Golden and Adam Weinberg. So welcome. I know you'll enjoy and profit from tonight's discussion with the fantastic Damien Wetzel. And I will just leave you with Eleanor's inspiring words from a speech she gave in the depths of the Depression about the need to protect the promise of the arts. Artistic expression, she said, is of concern to every community. And if we can gain nothing else from these years of hard times, it is that we have gained the acceptance of the fact that government has an interest in the development of artistic expression, no matter how the expression comes. And if we can widen the interest of the people in art, we have really reaped a golden harvest out of these barren years. Extraordinary words. Thank you all for adding to the harvest that the Roosevelts reaped. And speaking of harvesting great talent and great opportunities for a wide audience, it's a pleasure to introduce Lori Tisch.
Thank you, Harold. I don't really harvest, but but thank you for the kind remarks. But I could learn. I'm at a college. I could learn. So good evening and welcome to everybody. Many of you have heard me speak previously about what a terrific, inspirational, and yes, truly illuminating program and partnership this has been since its inception in 2009. And that's the partnership with the Laureum Tisch Illumination Fund, my brothers, Hunter College, and Aspen Institute. Each and every of our over 30 speakers has been informative, interesting, and at times even mesmerizing. Speakers have been leaders in the fields of politics, education, science, philanthropy, the arts, and so many more. I've also often said that it's an especially great pleasure and added bonus to have been able to introduce friends, which I've had the great fortune of doing quite a few times over the course of this 7-year program. That being said, I find myself almost, and almost is the operating word, at a loss of words when it comes to introducing the people on this panel tonight. It's such an extreme honor and pleasure for me to introduce not one, but three exceptional colleagues and extremely dear and cherished friends. Needless to say, I could spend the entire program just listing their extensive and impressive credentials, but I'll just give you a few highlights tonight, as hearing from them directly is surely the reason for this totally sold out crowd. So tonight's program features the leaders of two major New York arts institutions, the Whitney Museum and the Studio Museum in Harlem. Adam and Thelma's leadership extend far beyond their job titles. Tonight, they'll share with you their thoughts and insight into arts and its role in America's cultural landscape. But first, let me tell you just a little bit about each one of them. Thelma Golden, well, I'm sure you actually already know because that's why you're all here, but I'm going to stick with the program. Thelma Golden is director and chief curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem. She started her career there in 1987 and then joined the staff of the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1988, where she worked for over a decade before returning to the Studio Museum in 2000. She has been appointed to the Committee for Preservation of the White House by President Obama in 2010 and joined the Barack Obama Foundation Board in 2015. Thelma has also served as chair of New York City's Cultural Institution Group and was appointed to the Cultural Affairs Advisory Commission by Mayor Bill de Blasio. My good friend Adam Weinberg became the Alice Pratt Brown Director of the Whitney Museum in 2003. In 2015, the Whitney opened its 220,000 square foot building in the Meatpacking District. Adam's career has included serving as curator of the permanent collection of the Whitney, as well as artistic and program director of the American Center in Paris, director of the Addison Gallery of American Art at Phillips Academy, and director of education and assistant curator of the Walker Art Center. Adam also serves on a number of boards, including the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts and the Storm King Art Center. For me personally, as co-chair of the Whitney, I've worked very closely with Adam on several successful initiatives, including the creation of our extraordinary new building and creative and really important programs. We are now undergoing an extensive strategic planning process, and I am really thrilled and honored to be chairing the Equity and Inclusion Committee on Diversity, because that is something that it's so integral, not only to Adam and to me, but truly to everyone on this podium. Our moderator tonight is Damien Wetzel, also with an impressive arts background. Wow, talk about okay, that was a really dumb line. I think you really know that he has an impressive arts background, but I'm just going to talk about it for a little bit. Currently, Damien is the director of the Aspen Institute program, where I'm also on the board and have the great pleasure of working very closely with Damien. He's had a 20-year career as principal director of the New York City Ballet. In addition to his great work at the Aspen Institute, Damien is the artistic director of the Vail International Dance Festival and the founding director of the Jerome Robbins Foundation's new Essential Works program. In 2009, President Obama appointed Damien to the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities, and in 2015, he was awarded the Harvard Arts Medal. So as you can see, we are in for a very special program, which I'll now turn over to my friend Damien Wetzel.
Thank you so much, Lori, and welcome all of you. It's a pleasure to be back here at Roosevelt House. It's a home of public policy, and I think of the arts as being essential to public policy. Over the last years, with the Aspen Institute's arts program, we have done many sessions here, not only for people like yourselves, but also for students. Earlier this afternoon, Thelma and Adam met with students from Hunter and Columbia and other colleges around the city to talk about the topics that interested these young people who were pursuing careers in academia. They were potential curators. They were looking for insights, and it's such a pleasure to be able to be here in a home of public policy pursuing that goal of how the arts fit in. And the quote that you read by Mrs. Roosevelt was just so on top of it. So right. I would love to start with that idea of leadership and where it comes from to some extent, but looking specifically at the two of you, I think that you both were curators, and actually, Adam, you haven't entirely left that behind, as we've talked about. But how does that inform your directorship? When you think of like the fact that you're actually leading museums and institutions, but it comes from somewhere so close to the art itself and so close to a personal vision for how to share that art. How does that reflect? Thelma, would you start?
Sure. Well, first I want to say what a thrill it is to be here with Damien and Adam, who are incredibly dear colleagues, but also to be here at an Aspen Institute program because I am a very proud Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute, right? Thank you. So it's hard for me to talk about ideas of leadership without talking about Crown, because in so many ways what I think I know about my own approach to leadership in my field, in the museum field, but more importantly my institution, came from that engagement. So as you said, I began as a curator. And in many ways for me, being a curator seemed to be the way that I could hit at the cross-section of so many of my interests and my passions, right? My passion for artists of color, artists of African descent, my interest in the potential of museums to be different, open, inclusive, my opportunity to sort of make that happen in the time that I worked with Adam for a very long time at the Whitney, which was a great privilege, but then to understand that the tools that I had just from working could be matched by really understanding my own values and my ability to have those values have an impact, right, in the field and the world. So not simply to be about the action of, say, my own efforts, making my own exhibitions, thinking about my own institution, but really creating a wider platform to have these ideas exist in the world that I work in and the world that I love. So for me, leadership is about finding that place between my purpose and my passion.
And there it is.
And making it happen.
And the actual act of curating, you said earlier to the students that you just turned the switch and went, that's it, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I stopped. Part of that, though, is because I had an incredibly amazing career as a curator. You know, I became a curator at the Whitney 5 years after I graduated from Smith College. You know, incredible, right? So, you know, like, what was last night? Is it the playoffs for the Mets? What was last night? Playoffs? Okay, no, this is bad because our former boss, David Ross, used to always give me this baseball metaphor for what it was like for me to be a young curator, and it was always had something to do with the World Series, last game, last inning, but there are numbers attached to that, so it's like 7th game, 9th inning, and I never get it right, which he hated, so I'm not going to say it, but let's just say, right? 5 years.
Make your own, yes.
Yeah, 5 years. You know, and bases loaded. There's a lot of stuff in there that I don't know anything about.
It's the top of the eighth.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's one of those.
Like,
but all that to say,
anyway.
all that to say, imagine that I became a curator really early, and when I walked into the Whitney every day, I literally walked in with a sense of not only what I was going to do, that was me, but what I had to do for all those people that I represented something really important in that space. I understood what it meant to use both the power that came from that position, but also the privilege that was invested in it, so that I curated with an incredible amount of intention really quickly because I knew I had to get a lot of work done, so that getting to the Studio Museum, deciding not to curate when I became a director was really about, one, you know, I had to pull myself away from the narcotic that curating is, deeply. Hard to do that and have the rest of your life, you know what I mean? You know, like you only want to do that, and that's not a good director role. But more importantly for me, to step away from it is where I could create a whole lot of space to create a lot more curators. Because I lived so singularly for so long, and I felt like I was tired of looking at a museum world where this conversation about diversity was so hypothetical, right, and filled with so much desire, and well, wouldn't it be great? And I figured if I stopped curating and stopped sort of thinking that I would just hire curators, but really begin to nurture and create them, right, through the institutional structure, that I could have a much bigger impact than I could by making exhibitions myself. So that's what made me stop. Like, just turn it off, give it up, keep working.
Adam, why don't you give us your take on that? And it's
I'm
different.
having such a
It's-
good time
yes.
listening
No,
to
no,
Thelma.
stop it, no, no, stop it.
No, it's great because it's like the conversations we have all the time.
Exactly.
It's a wonderful.
But alone.
conversation.
See, there are all these people here, Adam,
Oh, that's
tonight.
right.
Oh, right.
Don't let that dissuade you.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, for me, the essential part about a museum that really matters to me is that it's where the object and the artist meet the audience, so to speak. And for me, a museum, either directly or indirectly, is about social change in one way or another, because every artist who puts forward, I think, a meaningful vision is about thinking about new paradigms, new ways of challenging the status quo, challenging themselves, but also challenging the world to say, is this art? What does this mean? How do we feel about it? You know, are the things that we've always taken for granted those things that we should take for granted? And so I think that that being a curator, you're really very closely involved with the art object and with the artist itself. And when you stand back and you're director, you're sort of a little bit removed from that. And, you know, I think one of the very special things about the Whitney Museum, and something that people forget, is Gertrude Philippa Whitney was an artist. And she never intended to create a museum. Her studio space was the first home of the Whitney Museum. It took place in a salon where she invited people. She intended to give her entire collection to the Met, and the Met didn't want it. So I often call it the accidental museum. She was really not interested in just the caretaking of objects. It was really not about it. It was about objects and artists. It was about the active engagement with the art and artists of her time, because she felt the American artist didn't have a place in our culture. And so for her, it was the idea that the museum isn't, you know, to kind of paraphrase Klaus Oldenburg, it's not a place where art just sits on its ass. It's a place where art actually gets up and shakes you and changes you. And, you know, you may not love what you see, but you know that you've had an encounter, an experience. And I always think of what Robert Rosenblum, the great art historian, always said, is he always said, if I see something and I don't like it, it's probably pretty good. If I see something and I hate it, it's probably great. And that, but it's not just for its own sake. It's for you know, looking at a culture that gets really stultified. And
You're talking as, you know, in ways that really make me think about the difference between passive institutions and active institutions. This is not a passive experience.
No.
Talking about art as being, you know, as a primary function is social change. And it makes me think about both of your institutions have very distinct missions, and you have that they evolve over time, but you're trying to guide those, but they're also very wedded in some ways to the idea that you're not just directing a museum, you're directing something bigger than that. And I think about that in terms of neighborhood, perhaps. It can go from the smallness of the neighborhood to the city to the country, and what that means as, you know, your role in that, because, you know, the audience is listening and watching, but they're not only doing that in this version, they're experiencing. Actually, you feel you failed if they haven't experienced.
I think it's really a big responsibility. I mean, you know, people think of the art world and the glamour and the connections and the artists, and, you know, and sure, that's all true. That's, you know, there is that aspect to it. But I think both Thelma and I feel that we have really profound responsibilities. What we show in our museums, and especially if we're looking at American art, you know, people look at the Whitney as representing what America is and what American art is. Am I in that story or am I not in that story? You know, how do people fit into it? It's not just like, well, this artist is great and we should show them. What is the mix of things you're showing? What are the stories you're telling? What are your responsibilities? What are your responsibilities to different audiences? And that's something, you know, we have to really. I actually believe that museums are really matter and are places that really are agents of social change in the broadest sense. And you know, a colleague of mine once said, a museum is a safe place for unsafe ideas. And I actually think that's true, because oftentimes there are things you get arrested for if you do it in the museum, if you didn't do it in the museum.
Right.
But that idea that it is a safe place where people can really test things and test ideas. And I think that's a big responsibility, to provide that safe place to provide an arena for conversation that's also really meaningful and not just a place of spectacle and fun and enjoyment, all of which we all enjoy.
Thelma, we talked a little earlier about the idea of it being a place within a neighborhood that is not simply a place to go and view art or experience art. And one of the young people asked you about that ability to draw people in. And that, we have a bunch of things we can talk about, relevance and the idea of drawing audience. But you spoke a little bit about the idea that it's a place that things happen in, even beyond art, and how that's introductory. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think for some of us, if we want to imagine that we can rethink the idea of what a museum can be, right, then we have to imagine ourselves having a different relationship to ideas of community. You know, the founders of the Studio Museum were very intentional by putting "in Harlem" in our name, right? It was the idea that the museum is in Harlem. And that creates mission every day, right? The idea that we are the Studio Museum in Harlem. You know, what is Harlem and what are we to Harlem? And for us, that means that to talk about ideas of access and openness and availability means that we also have to talk about what that means in the community. And so sometimes that means thinking about the physical space of the museum differently, right, than we might if we saw it purely as an institution for art first and audience and community after that, right? And that's allowed us at the museum to be incredibly impactful in the way in which not only we work with artists, but the way in which we can live in the neighborhood. You know, I sort of say it all the time. We have to think of ourselves, you know, as an institutional neighbor, right? And how do we live in the neighborhood we live in? But it also is about, again, this idea of radical notions of institutions. You know, we were founded in 1968 with the model of, you know, the Met, the MoMA, the Guggenheim, you know, all as what the Studio Museum was founding itself against. Because those models were about a kind of exclusion, an exclusion of ideas, an exclusion of art, and an exclusion of people. And the Studio Museum was founded to answer that by creating a space that looked at the breadth and the depth of work made by African American artists, but also to create a different idea of an institutional structure where ideas of institutional authority could be questioned, right, and turned. And I think, you know, something I always took with me, I loved the Whitney founding story, because it was very like Hamilton-esque to me. You know, I always saw myself in the version of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. Look, she was this young woman.
Hamilton, I like that.
No, she was this young woman. She had this radical idea. She asked the powers that be. They were like, yeah, really? And she was like, I'm going to do it. And that's how I felt, you know, in my career, right? That I had this sort of idea of what I imagined I could do. And even within the sort of power structures sort of saying, we're not sure about this, you know, making it happen. And so taking that model and then coming into an institution that was found out of this, you know, in real the fire of that moment in the late 60s, means that thinking about ideas like community can't be the afterthought that sort of sits in something like education or outreach. They have to be right up front, literally, right, in the idea of what the museum is and can be.
Right, so there's a lot of emphasis on the remaking of institutions, whether it's let's say the Lincoln Center expansion and remodeling, the idea of openness. Everything is meant to be more open. And I, having spent several decades in the closed version, now see the other version.
Yeah.
And in the end, though, you know, we talked a little earlier that you're not as concerned about the fact, perhaps, that people might come and hang out in your new beautiful open space lobby or
Quite the
outside, and
contrary.
if they
The
don't
idea-
come to see the exhibit, that's okay.
Yeah, quite the contrary. I mean, the idea was to create a place that people want to be. I mean, two things. Just going back to the founding story, is the word that appears most often in the kind of founding documents around the Whitney, whether it did it or not, was the word inclusive, not exclusive, which is why people often thought the Whitney was not critical enough and not tough enough in its taste and didn't have the masterpieces. And I think it's because, to the best of their ability, they really did try to be inclusive, which meant maybe sometimes it wasn't the things that fit in what was the canon at the time. But going back to the idea of the opening is that, you know, when we talked with Renzo Piano about the building, a lot of what we wanted was that kind of transparency. And it's not just because we wanted light and because we wanted views. We wanted people to be able to see into the building. You know, you think of the Whitney Breuer building. It's a great piece of architecture. There's a moat. It's a castle. There's an eye, you know, a big window, that all-knowing window eye that looks at the apartment building across the street. And as I like to say, you could be in Singapore or Hamburg and you wouldn't know the difference. when you are in the current Whitney building, and it's not by accident by any means, because we spent so many years designing it, right, Lori? We really thought, first of all, it was designed from the inside out. What were the purposes? And people often have a hard time trying to understand the building, because if you think of most museums, it's the frontal view. It's the front of the Guggenheim, the front of the Whitney, the front of the Met, and that's how you understand it. Our museum was always thought about as something that was open to the world, 360 degrees, that people would be able to look in through the transparency of the lobby, that you'd look into the galleries from the street and from the High Line, and once you're in the building, you always know that you are in New York. You have a sense of place. You couldn't be just anywhere. You could only be at one place. And for a museum that's about art in the United States, it's always important to have that sense of grounding. And then even the transparencies that looked into the behind-the-scenes area, whether it's the conservation lab or the study center or the offices, we don't want it to be a mystery to people. We want to kind of demystify the experience. And the fact that you can actually get out of the galleries relatively quickly, that's a positive. This shouldn't be going to a museum as a kind of force-fed experience where you go in one chamber and you come out the other end. It really should be, and I think it's changed the way people use the museum. I think, for example, the Tisch Education Center, we have a lot of informal programs that are going on there. The idea that you can go outside, you can go inside, that you could see art in bits and pieces. It's not this feeling that you're cramming for your art history exam and have to remember all the names. It's the idea that actually your encounter with a single work of art, just one great work, can be the most meaningful thing. And to provide the kind of space, places where people can sit, they can relax, they can do their emails, they don't have to feel like, wait, there are things that you're not supposed to do. I mean, obviously you can't touch the artwork, there are rules, but the idea, what is museum behavior? And, museum behavior, first of all, is changing, and, we hope that there are places that you can meditate and you can have quiet, but at the same time, we have to understand that people absorb things in different ways, and we need to provide those kinds of flexible ways into the building and out of the building.
So he's just finished the expansion, well, the move and the change of neighborhood, which we could talk about too. But you're on the cusp of your expansion.
We are. And you know what's sort of ironic? This is where, the contradictions come out, because no one has spoken more than me about the desire to kind of rethink and change and transform institutions. I hold that on one side, but at the very same time, yes, I am building a building. And really think about that as sort of the most important thing the Studio Museum can do right now. We are 48 years old. We were founded in a rented loft space, second floor space over a liquor store on Fifth Avenue between 125th and 126. Moved into our current building in 1981. Was built in 1914 as a bank. So was never made to be a museum, was left sort of derelict as most of the street was. So when we went there, it was with a lot of sense of, no one could see the possibility of what 125th Street would be again. Took on that building, but now as we approach our 50th anniversary, look at the mission of the museum and the way in which the art museum world has changed in relation to Black artists, and can really be proud of our role in that conversation. It does feel like what we've become demands a physical space that matches what is the ambition and the aspiration of our program, our collection, our residency program, and who we are in Harlem. So yes, we are at the beginning of building a building. I was very thrilled. Adam very generously hosted a small gathering to maybe, warn some of my board what they were in for as we sat in his new building a month after it opened, right?
And I said, it can be done.
It can be done, which
and
I
you
needed.
will do it.
And I needed at that moment because we were on the
20
other
years,
side.
okay.
And I sort of was like, yeah, Adam, please, just say, this
work.
is possible.
Yes.
And my board chairman, Raymond McGuire, is a Whitney board member, so he lived through the Whitney process and has brought all of that into the sort of, rigor and generosity and, just the complete grace with which we are entering into what for us is the hugest jump we could possibly make, but feels so right now. So we are in a design process, and one day we'll be in a construction process, and then we will open a new building on 125th Street.
With a great architect.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's
That'd be
right.
great.
I think a key word that you put in there, and I think it was also true with the Whitney, that sometimes institutions build buildings for their own sake because they need something bright and shiny and new, and they want to create destination architecture. You use the word demands. The reason, and I'll never forget once, because when Mayor Bloomberg said to me, it's something. So, how did you have the nerve to build the Whitney Museum? He actually knew the answer to this, to move the Whitney Museum from uptown to downtown. And I thought about it, and I said, it's the two ends. And he looked at me, and I said, it's naivete and necessity. Naivete, if I'd known what I was doing, I never would have done it.
Right.
But to your point about demands, the Whitney had no choice. It couldn't function. It couldn't be the institution it needed to be. Not just wanted to be, but needed to be. And I think that sense of demand, the sense of urgency, is what helps you to create the kind of space and to be able to respond to the community and to the art that you have. I think that's the critical thing. And people feel that. They feel a building is urgent versus they feel a building, well, it's nice, it's a nice place, but why does it really matter?
Because you couldn't be your best self, or were there things you couldn't do?
Everything,
artists you couldn't exhibit.
I'll give you, a perfect example, and Thelma knows this well. When we opened the building only with collection and a wonderful exhibition curated by our chief curator called America's Hard to See. And I love the title of that show because it was about how hard it really is to understand this place we call home in America. And the complexities, the layers, the contradictions. We barely had the space to show just the tip of the iceberg of we couldn't even ask those questions in any really full way. And now we have the kind of space where we actually are able to challenge ourselves and our visitors and to understand what we have. Because it's funny, when you look at your own collection, you look at it on a computer, or you look at it with, with images, it's not the same thing as seeing them in a public space, seeing how people see them and experience them and what they do. That's what artists did. That's why they make them. That's why they... And to see that and to get that sense of interaction, we have this great show now of 2 floors called... it's about portraiture. I just forgot the name. It's terrible. Close. But it's what all these titles are connected. But and human interest. Thank you, not human. And it's really a question about what is portraiture. It's not. This is a show of portraiture. It questions the nature of it. We could never have done this. This has 300 works from the collection of all kinds, by artists from all periods, working in all different ways, from all different cultural backgrounds. And there was a necessity to have enough space to be able to ask those questions and fulfill what is our mission, but our mission in relationship to the people who are out there. And what
it's not just about the amount, but also the type, obviously, the way you described it.
I think it's also a question of leadership, right? Understanding what your institution needs in order to be able to be effective, right? What are we contributing to audience, to the field, to the city? That becomes the question, but also a question of legacy. And I think often museum building projects are seen as being a part of the legacy of an individual director, and I don't see it that way at all. I mean, I feel I'm building a building because Mary Schmidt-Campbell, who was director of the Studio Museum from 1977 to 1988, had the brilliance to find the building we're in now and buy it in that moment, which makes it possible. She already set the aspiration for what the museum could be. So building this building for me is really being able to finish what she began, and that was taken on after her by Conchasha Holman Conwell and then Lowry Stokes Sims, then leaving it to me. It's a stewardship question about an institution's life.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the Whitney's building was the result of basically 30 years of trying. 4 directors, 4 architects, and God knows how many plans later.
We're not doing that.
Thank God.
We're not doing that.
So, this is so diametrically opposed in some ways to some less expansive views of what museum means. And I'll tell you, for instance, when I joined New York City Ballet, it was in the wake of Mr. Balanchine's passing, and there was a great kind of controversy, argument, discord over how to preserve his works. And on one side there was literally said, well, we don't want it to be a museum. Sorry.
Yeah.
But that was
that's
really
exactly
said.
what it has to be.
And then it was a redefining of what that meant.
Right.
And I think about that a lot in terms of relevance. Totally. How relevant? How much do you chase relevance? Do you feel like you have to? Do you feel like that's something you really audience, the amount of audience that you can't help but think about it, I'm sure, and what that means, what's going to draw people.
Well, first of all,
I would distinguish.
I would if you're popular, does that mean you're more relevant? I'll ask you that question, because I think you can be incredibly relevant. I mean, when Jackson Pollock was painting his first paintings, his work was incredibly relevant, and everybody thought it was crap.
Okay.
You know,
I
guess
could flip it around and say that if you're in the
attention.
board meeting, you might say, well, you might be very relevant, but nobody's coming.
Right.
Yeah. So.
No, I was going to say, that's my trustee there.
Sorry, well, I couldn't help it. She's right there, so, you know, what am I going to do? But, so yeah, I think you could kind of look at it, turn it around.
I think that, you know, I feel that the curators and the director have to feel fully immersed in their time, at least in our, because again, our museum being founded by an artist, somebody who really believed in the art of their time and really was committed as much to artists and art making as they were to the mausoleum as opposed to the museum in a way, which she basically said, I don't want my museum to be that kind of museum. I think it's about really living in the present and not, I mean, I remember years ago, my daughter, when she was studying violin, and she turned to me and she said, how come, she was probably about 10 years old, how come all the great composers are dead? And I thought to myself, this is a 10-year-old kid who spent her entire life in contemporary art museums surrounded by contemporary artists, and she thought that nobody, the makers of her time, the visionaries of their time, no longer existed. That is about agency, to use the word that Thelma uses, I think, so well. It's the understanding that the only way we can change and realize the best of our time is to live in our time, to deal with our time, address our time. And that doesn't mean turning our back. I mean, I think of the great Stuart Davis show that we just had at the museum. How did he do it at his time? Understanding that works of art that might be by artists no longer living were contemporary in their time. Yeah. They were change item makers, you know, objects in their time. So it's about not being afraid to face one's time, the present moment, the presence of being in the gallery. You were talking about the show that you have up now, where the artist is lying down in the gallery. It's that moment of not just discovery, shock, awareness, and realizing we do have agency if we're willing to, you know, grab this moment. And that's what artists do. They don't know what it's going to mean, but they're willing to kind of try to grab it and try to harness it and try to say, yes, we can do something with this moment. And I just find it, I mean, look, I love the past as much as anybody. I'm an art historian, but it is about, and it's not about just saying only new things are good, but it's about saying, this is our moment, this is our time, we live once, let's try to really do something with it. And that's where the responsibility comes in.
That's a perfect segue. We could maybe talk about what you have up right now. You tell us about that piece of art, but also about artists in general, about the artists you're excited about, the things, you know, let's talk about the thing itself for a few minutes.
Well, you know, the studio in our name, Studio Museum in Harlem, comes from the fact that from our founding, we've always had artist studios in the building. And it has always been an important part of understanding, again, this sort of reinvention of the idea of the museum that our founders held. And that was to put sort of process and presentation right next to each other. The artist studio and the making of art and the presenting of art as being equal. And so right now we have our current Artist in Residence exhibition on view, and it comes after the artists have been in the studio, but more importantly been in Harlem for a year. And the goal is always that in that year they are in the studio making work, but it's inevitable, right? That there's a way that this collision between the place, the institution, and their practice come together. I mean, this is a program that has, you know, we proudly have graduated so many amazing people from it. Carrie James Marshall, David Hammonds, Alison Sarr, Julie Moretti, Mickey.
Who then go on to show at the Whitney after they graduated,
You know,
often
so
thanks to Thelma, too.
So many, Kehinde Wiley, I mean, just so many fantastic artists. And every year it's amazing to be in the presence. And right now the three artists on view are Jordan Castile, a figurative painter, Khalil Huffman, who is a video maker, performance artist, and E.J. Hill, who has made an incredible sculptural work, but it includes a performative element that has him laying in the sculpture in all the hours we are open. And it is an amazing thing to experience in this moment in history, because the way in which our audiences, and again, the commitment at the institution is to be wide in our approach to audience, read that work through art, art history, performance history, aesthetics, critical theory, but they also read it through the contemporary moment. What does it mean to encounter the body of a young black man laying down in the museum. And it's a profound space in which that work sort of activates, a conversation that can start with Flaving and end with Black Lives Matter. It's
Right,
incredible.
exactly.
And that's what great work can do. And that's what the space of kind of curating in a way that allows artists to have a lot of agency within the sense of how they want to present in public space to do that. And this is an artist who saw the opportunity in this moment in our space to make a work, a physically demanding, yes, on him, but one that he knew uniquely these circumstances might not happen again, that he could do
Just
it.
take advantage.
Yeah.
We're going to open for questions in a moment or two. I thought maybe, Adam, you could talk about the physical space and the possibilities, because I remember when I first toured the Whitney, being told, for instance, every floor is sprung.
That's
There's
right.
like the things that can happen are extraordinary, and I'm sure that was all thought through and baked in. But I'm sure you're getting some surprises too.
We're always being surprised. I mean, artists, that's the one thing. You design it one way thinking artists are going to use it one way, and then it always ends up being something other than what you expected. I mean, we have some artists who are going to be spending 10 days living in the theater, between the two glass walls that face the street of the museum. I mean, I think there's a theme here, but
Time.
no, but no, we tried to. I mean, we saw the new building as aspirational space for artists. I mean, that was where they would come and they'd look at the space and they would sort of dream and say, this is what I would like to do there. But they'd look at it and they'd give them ideas, and it would stimulate ideas so that it could be, a performance. And we've used our entire fifth floor, which is 18,000 square feet, which we've used for, 1 week performances. We've presented it totally empty with a sound installation by Andrea Fraser dealing with Sing Sing Prison. The whole idea that we have one outdoor space that's being used by an artist named Virginia Overton. She has windmills and a self-supporting ecosystem outside. Who would have known? So the idea was to make it flexible but not multi-purpose. I always think of the multi-purpose room as where I had when I was in elementary school, and you went in and you could play kickball and have your cafeteria at the same time. Multi-purpose means no purpose. But flexibility is a different thing, where you can actually it has a purpose but has flexible use. And thinking about the program, I was thinking just now about what we have, and we have this an exhibition, a project by an artist named Sophia Almaria, who's this young Bedouin American artist in her 20s, really her first museum show. And at the same time, we have this wonderful survey of the artist Carmen Herrera, who's 101 years old. And then we have, as I said, the Human Interest Portraiture show, and it's about all of these different kinds of Americas and what are the questions of America. And it's not, it's not a specific age, it's not a specific race, a specific culture. It's nobody's domain. It's everybody's domain. And it's and again, going back to the space, these are the kinds of things we couldn't have had the space to do, and is to tell the multiple stories. How do you tell the multiple stories in a unitary space? It's much harder to do, and it doesn't mean the more space you have, the better, because the last thing I'd say about the building is I remember when President Clinton would always say, it's the economy, stupid. I wanted to give out T-shirts to my staff before we opened that said it's the program, stupid. It is a great building. We love our building. We're having a lot of fun. Artists are challenged. But it isn't about the building. You can have a great building, but if it isn't alive, if it isn't full of art, if it isn't full of encounters, if it isn't full of education, then what's the purpose? It's really about the art, the people, the audience, the energy. You've almost, in a way, almost done nothing if it's just the shell of a building.
But I think
Absolutely.
really what we all draw so much inspiration from the Whitney building for is the fact that it is so artist responsive. One of the reasons we are thrilled to be working with David Adjaye is because David, as an architect, and me as a curator, have had an arc with a group of artists together that, at core, informed the way in which we began to even think of what a museum space could be. And often, there's sort of the cliche of, sort of trying to get outside of the box. And the critic Roberta Smith said something like, you can't get out of the box if you don't recognize its walls. Right? And I think in many ways, this idea of what we are all now aspiring to in this flexible space is this recognition of how confining, right, the walls can be. So really creating spaces that are inspired by what creates then the challenge to give art the primacy, right, that it demands through all the ways that artists have practiced in the past, because that's important as well, right, to create a frame for these sort of amazing collections our institutions have amassed, but also to create the possibility of openness for the future. And that's a real architectural challenge, but I think great architects rise to that because they are inspired by artists to do that.
And I think David's work, and I was just at the Denver
Yeah,
Contemporary,
right,
which I think
which
was
he
his
designed.
first museum he designed
It
here.
is, yeah.
It feels like a building that, again, comes from necessity and need, and not that, things are
Yeah.
being done for its own sake. And
Yeah.
I mean, it is sort of almost a form follows function, but it's even more than that.
Yeah.
It's about an urgency
Right.
of the need of being responsive to the art in the community.
Right, and that's his brilliance, and he
Yeah.
brings his art to that, and I think
Exactly.
we have all seen that in Washington at
Yeah.
the National Museum of African American History
Right.
and Culture, which is a masterpiece on all levels. Physical building, content, I mean, everything about it, but it really shows the way program and architecture can meld and then together create an experience that is unsurpassed.
Well, as we discussed, a complete realization of that thing we talk about, that it can happen,
Yeah.
that the art location can be the place where people actually meet.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That they actually
Exactly.
can be, and we witnessed
Right.
that at the opening.
Exactly.
That can be
Mhm.
that level of understanding
Exactly.
reach.
That was, happening right in those spaces.
I feel like, you have it teed up unbelievably as the Museum of American Art.
Mm-hmm.
To define American in this day and age, in this particular moment, is actually, you're
But it's
seizing
true.
that
But
responsibility.
it's about asking questions,
Right.
and that's what the Whitney does. I often, to my husband's chagrin, it's very hard for me to be in other people's museums and not talk to visitors, right? He calls it my fake docent act.
too.
Okay, and I do it all the time. And what's been so interesting, it's true, I do it at the Whitney, and the guards at the Whitney encourage it. I mean, because
Well,
they.
by the way, the guards at the Whitney think she still works
That's
at the
true.
Whitney.
They do. So they encourage it. But one of the things that is so great about human interest
Right.
is the way in which people go look for themselves in the
Yes.
art, right? Go look for
Wow.
themselves.
Right.
And
That's
in that,
correct.
that's their way in, and that idea of Americanness,
Mhm.
right? And that installation, which represents that collection in all of its depth and diversity, allows that. So when I stand in those galleries, in front of the Barclay Hendricks, and people go to it, right, as a reflection of what they understand the power of representation to be, it's an incredible way in which we can have conversations about art, identity, culture, our shared histories. It's what museums can do, and they can do best in our ability to define in this moment and really ask important questions.
And as we said earlier, every choice matters
Matters, that's
that
right.
we make. I mean,
Well,
that's what
that's-
artists
that-
teach us.
Yeah.
Every choice,
Yeah.
every work, why
That's
it's
right.
there, what its meaning, its connection to
Mhm.
people or not,
Mhm.
it really matters.
We actually settled earlier on that the essential leadership quality is interrogation, constant interrogation of purpose, of choice, and reinterrogating.
And knowing that that has to be important if you want to serve. I think there's an institutional model where we could just be invested in amassing, right, resources, art,
Sure.
money,
That's right.
people, audience. But if we really imagine ourselves as institutions that want to serve, then we have to question. Because our ability to have impact, our ability to be relevant, our ability to actually make a difference means that we have to ask incredibly important questions. And sometimes as an institution, what that means is you have to change and you have to shift. And you have to open yourselves in ways that sometimes can feel uncomfortable.
Well, we have 10 minutes left, so we're going to go to questions. I think we have mics, so if you raise your hand, we'll start
Always
right
have a
here.
mic.
Come down, just wait for the mic.
Hi, I'm Janice Lentz, and I'm an Aspen Institute Scholar for Spotlight on Health. And Adam is talking about interrogation. I do access for people with hearing loss, and we've been talking about changing the paradigm. How do we change the paradigm for people with hearing loss being included in museums? The new museum, which you mentioned, the National Museum of Africa in D.C., I have an article in HuffPost yesterday. It left out hearing access. You cannot hear the voices on the videos. So imagine listening to Martin Luther King's by reading it on when you have residual hearing. You don't get that power of him as an orator. that's like missing half of Martin Luther King, because that's half of who he is. How do we finally make that dramatic shift to include people with disabilities, including people with physical disabilities, but moving beyond that?
Yeah, I think you bring up an important issue that I know that in the many conversations we've been having in the field generally about diversity, where we know we have to keep this broadest idea of diversity on the table because it can be missed. I mean, many of us live within a constant state of inspiration by our colleague Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation, and he just sent out an email about this, right? About, how, again, the ability to not include disability, right, in our range of access. And I think it's important work that we have to do. Here in the city, the way we've been approaching this is by, again, trying to have the conversations that allow us to interrogate all the ways in which we are not doing our best work for the many communities of people who do not have access because of their disabilities or just being differently abled. Right? And understanding that as a space we can work in. So I think you're bringing up an important issue that has to be at the front of all of our minds as we think about our institutions now, but also as we design them, moving into the future.
I think that's a great point about Darren's letter, which
yesterday,
I think brought that question
That's
to
right.
the attention of just a myriad of leaders within the arts field about the need to recognize that and to get working.
Yeah. Fantastic. Right. One person. Of course. Right. You're exactly right.
Can we go back there?
Thank you so much for such amazing, incredible, and inspiring words about your experience tonight. It's been very exciting. Both of your institutions are located in neighborhoods that have undergone tremendous change over the last 20 years. One that went from almost barren of people to being full of people, and one that has been full of people and is full of very different kinds of people, or people with very different kinds of means. That's my home, is Harlem. And I'm just interested to hear you both reflect on the meaning of the sort of astounding time of wealth redistribution and movement that's happening in our city, and how that's impacting your institutions, maybe in a great way, but maybe in problematic or questionable or difficult new ways.
For better and for worse, the Whitney has affected the gentrification of that neighborhood. And, I think for us the most important is number one, even before we moved downtown, we connected to the NYCHA houses, to the community groups, to the English as second language, and working with the public schools. And we came down really early and say, this is your neighborhood, not just going to be our neighborhood. So it was about connecting and recognizing their importance and that this is their homes. And I do think in some ways the Whitney's always been a local museum. It started in the village, actually, and it was returned to the village. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is, this is where I think artists help. Artists also, as much as I talked about the present, art is about memory. It's about duration. It's about connection. It's about, and we have had artists already making things in relationship, in response to the neighborhood. We have some interesting plans about ideas of artists being able to connect to the history of the neighborhood. As much as I like to think that we have agency as institutions, there's only so much we can do in terms of that sense of the urban, but what we can do is connect to what's there, what matters, and not let people forget what they've lost. One of the things I always love is that our museum is on Gansevoort Street. Most people don't even know who Gansevoort was, he was a Revolutionary War general who was the great-grandfather of Herman Melville, and Herman Melville lived on our site and wrote part of Billy Budd on our site. But there's also, it's also a neighborhood of artists. The piers, which are now mostly gone, were basically a secondary home to the gay community at a time when the gay community was not accepted. And so for us, what we can do to reconnect people to what those histories are and what's going on, that in a way is the best that we can do, because we can't actually stop it, but is to remind people not only of what they've gained, maybe what has been lost.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's hard for me to answer your question because I live within the sort of complexity, right, of what it means to be in Harlem now. And not just as the director of the Studio Museum in this moment, but as someone, my father was born in 1926 on 135th Street and 7th Avenue and went to public school in Harlem until he graduated from high school, Benjamin Franklin High School, and then, was drafted and went to the Korean War. He started his business on the corner where the museum is, and the museum, the building, was the bank where he banked. So he referred to, if anyone said, where's Thelma's museum, he'd say, the bank, right? My father was the kind of Harlemite, and when he passed away a year ago at 89, he was the kind of Harlemite who believed that the world began at 100th Street. So he said, streets in Harlem without the 100. So if you said, where's the Studio Museum, he'd say 25th, because all Harlemites, basically the city starts at 100th. You don't need to say 125th. You know what someone's talking about. And my father, who also had severe hearing loss at the end of his life and wore hearing aids but hated them with the background noise, would speak too loudly in public and would walk the streets of my current Harlem and say, oh my goodness, where did all these white people come from? No, literally, right? Because he lived through, Harlem, he was born at the end of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem that we completely romanticize, right? What I spend, years making shows about, he lived through, right? That was his Harlem. And then he also lived through the Harlem that changed, which is when, we moved and he moved, and I was born in Queens in the 60s. So I say all that to say, I see it as a long arc, right? So, and that long arc is one that really makes me think about neighborhood as a geographic designation, but community as the space that we are trying at the Studio Museum to protect. Right? So gentrification is a neighborhood issue. I can't really get into that, but community is what we can steward, what we can engage with. And that's what, I feel like that's my personal DNA, right? I am a child of Harlem, and that's what I have to speak to when we talk about the Whole Foods opening on the corner of 125th and Lenox, right?
So we're at the end of our time, and I want to thank both of you immensely for discussing.
Thank you,
Thank
Damien.
you, Damien.
You did a very good conversation.
Damien, thank you.
I would just say that, we have, to quote, another president who, in speaking of Robert Frost, he said, the fate of an America without art is that of the hired man with nothing to look back on and nothing to look forward to. And you both, as stewards of your museums and of your neighborhoods and communities, are giving us so much to do both look back on, as you just said, and to look forward to. So we thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you.